3 is to remove the lawn. And this can be done in a couple of different ways. You can decide to solarize your lawn, which is basically take plastic. You want clear plastic because you want the sun to come through it and get trapped under your plastic. You'll cover your lawn. You have to do this for probably six weeks to 8 weeks to really, fry it. If it's Bermuda, it doesn't seem to work. We've tried it in an organic garden, and it doesn't seem like the Bermuda has deep enough roots that it comes back from that. It definitely knocks it back, but it comes back through. But if you have other grass, it's very effective in getting rid of it. It just makes your yard look really ugly for a couple months. You can physically remove it by getting a sod cutter and cutting it out. And that's what we chose to do on this project for most of it. We also demonstrated some sheet mulching, which we're gonna show you here in a moment. But either way, the physical removal, you need to cut out the sod. This particular site had Bermuda grass, so we cut out 2 inches inch and a half of sod and removed it, and we still had Bermuda grass coming back, so we cut out another 1.5 inches of sod and removed that. So that was a lot of labor to do that. You also have to have a good place to dispose of that sod. So we had a compost pile that we didn't care if we put Bermuda grass in, we'll compost it and it'll go out into one of our fields that it won't matter if it gets a little bit of Bermuda or not. But that process sometimes can be difficult because you can't find a place to haul it away, or you can't, you don't know where to dispose of it. So that can be a challenge. The other thing is that those rolls are heavy. So that you have to have some strength to do that. And then the sheet mulching is where you actually lay layers of material over the grass and kind of smother it. And there's a process to that, which I will demonstrate here in a minute. We have a film of us doing it at the site. And then finally, you can use herbicides to spray it out. And that may take more than one application of herbicide, though. It might be 2 or 3. We actually had some of the Bermuda, before we ended up cutting out another section of the Bermuda grass on this project, we actually sprayed it with a herbicide that specifically said it would kill Bermuda grass, and it didn't even phase it. So that's why we went back and had to cut it out. So sometimes you may be just wasting your money and causing an environmental toxic situation that you don't need to. So anyway, just think about that. But on most things, herbicide is fairly effective, and you can get rid of your lawn quickly that way.
Any concern, though, about the new plants you'll be putting in after you've used herbicides?
It depends a little bit on the herbicide you use. Some have a residual effect. Most that are over-the-counter stuff for the homeowner are not going to have that issue. So they won't have a residual effect on any of the plants that you put in after. Most herbicides break down pretty rapidly in the soil, and they break down into usually carbon or water. So it's not, they're not lingering around. The exception to that would be is if you put down some sort of pre-emergent, and some of the pre-emergents stunt root growth. It depends on the type of pre-emergent you use. A pre-emergent is where you're trying to keep things from seeds from sprouting or other things, but that can have a residual effect. And then there are some things, like if you have star thistle or something like that that you treated, some of those herbicides have a lasting residual effect for almost 8 months. So they could be detrimental to your newly planted plants. But for the most part, most stuff that's that's available to the homeowner is not going to have a residual effect. Yes?
If you use sheet mulching, what if you have mature trees in that area?
That's a great question. Yes, if you change the elevation of the soil around them. So if it's not going to harm the tree as far as you putting the sheet mulching around the tree. However, because you're not smothering the tree, you're just putting it around the roots. But if you're changing the elevation of the soil around the tree, that can cause problems because it may have water that then focuses more water into the crown of the tree or whatever. So if you are going to be doing something around a tree, make sure you're staying away from the main crown of the roots by at least 3 feet or so. So just, you know, making sure that area around the tree is not, and then allow for drainage away from that. So, you know, if you are changing the elevation, make sure that you're planning for that and allowing for water to drain away from the tree somewhere. Because adding a bunch of sheet mulching does raise your elevation. So even though it does kind of decompose after some time, it's still going to give you extra inches of stuff. So I do want to show you that process. So that's what I was going to show you next. So I'm just going to show, I'm not sure which video clip this is. So we're going to show this one first. This is the house before we started. And this is basically the what the house looked like. So they had just this brick. That was the house before we started, right? So it's just basically lawn. The one thing that was kind of strange about it is they had a brick front that was kind of leaning out into the sidewalk that actually had a lot of soil behind it. So that was a big elevation change, especially when they wanted us to put in a walk, which we'll show you kind of after what it looks like. So here's us removing the sod. So in this is what you do with a sod cutter, is basically the sod cutter goes underneath the grass and cuts it. And then you just go ahead and roll it up. So, and it's a lot of work. So it was not quite that fast. When you're cutting the sod out, you usually are only taking a couple inches of soil. So you shouldn't be cutting into, if you have roots that shallow, you have a problem anyway. But your tree roots should not be harmed with anything that you're cutting that shallow from it. As long as you're outside of the drip line of the trees, so wherever that tree, what I mean by drip line is wherever the canopy of the tree ends, right? And you could cut larger roots, and as long as you're not doing that in the dead of summer when it's really, you know, the trees might be stressed, it should then grow new branched roots out, and it shouldn't, you know, as long as you're not, you know, going through and cutting all of the roots off, that shouldn't harm it too, you know, that should not be a major shock to the tree. If you're cutting deeper than that, however, like if you're having to excavate down, say 1 foot, and you're cutting a lot of that soil out, that might be an issue for those trees. So you'd want to be kind of cautious if you're going more than, say, 3 or 4 inches in the soil depth. Most trees, about 50% of their roots are within the first foot of the soil. So this particular site had Modesto ashes along the main street, and there's a sidewalk in between, and then the way out in their yard, there's roots. It's really matted with roots. I mean, those Modesto ashes just basically came up under the sidewalk and have filled in their yard with the roots. And I was talking to them that they're going to have to probably give those trees supplemental water because they're going to suck all the water out of their native plant area, or they're just their low water use area, because those trees are going to be wanting every drop of the water. So they may have to be watering slightly more just because of those Modesto ashes that are in their health strip on the street. Okay, so here's how you get rid of the mulch or the lawn by the lasagna method. So the first thing that we want to do is you always want to mow your weeds down as short as you can. So whatever existing weeds are there, you want to mow them down until they're, you know, as low as you can get them. Start off with manure. We put that down as a layer, and I'm going to just kind of dump it out there, and then we'll spread it around. So it's probably the fastest way we can do it. So we're using a mixture of goat and cow manure, just because that's what we have on hand here at the college. But you can use any kind of manure. You want about 1 inch depth of that manure. So 1 inch to 1.5 inches depth. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to lay down cardboard or newspaper. If you can use also newspaper if you double up and use like multiple sheets of it. But you're going to be using cardboard or newspaper, and you want to overlap it by about 6 inches. Try not to use any waxed or has a lot of dye or anything on it, but you want to have, if you're using newspaper, don't use glossy paper. You want to have, regular newsprint type paper. So the next thing you want to do is put a layer of dry on there, and we call this the browns. And this can be anything from straw to leaves to shredded paper, anything that would be considered a brown. So if you're looking at a compost pile and they list you a whole list of brown materials, this is the same idea. Now you don't want to use things like alfalfa or something like that. That would be considered a green. That's got a lot of nitrogen in it. And even if it's dry, we'd still consider it a green. Wood chips can also be used as a brown, though it takes a lot longer for them to break down. So if you're wanting to plant the area within like 6 months or so, probably not using wood chips because of how long it takes for them to break down. You want a couple inches depth is all that you need for that. Then you put another layer of green, and you want your greens to be about the same depth as your brown. So get about 1 to 2 inches of green on this area, and you'll spread it out over the area. Then you do the same thing, and another layer of brown, and then you're going to go back over it again with a layer of green, and just try and get it equally spread. So then once you have that second layer of green over there, so now you have about 4 inches. That's about minimum. If you are doing this kind of method, you want at least 4 to 6 inches of material. And the reason that you want to wet it is because you're trying to get your compost to starting to break down. So you're going to want this to start composting and getting hot, and that's going to kill your weed seed that might be underneath this area. And then if you want to plant into it right away, you can actually top this off with a layer of soil. We're going to put a layer of compost over it just to hold it in place, but you can put a layer of soil on top, and that can keep it in place, but also allow you to plant into it right away. You want to use cardboard that's unwaxed. The reason for that is the waxed cardboard, you want this eventually to break down, and the waxed cardboard doesn't break down really efficiently. And then above the waxed cardboard, then you're going to put a layer of green or a layer of brown. It doesn't matter which one you start with. You just want to layer them. So you're kind of, think the lasagna idea of just kind of doing layers of things. The greens can be anything from like kitchen scraps to grass clippings to manure to anything that is kind of, chopped up weeds, whatever. Don't add weed seed to it, or you're going to add problems back to your site. But, just anything that's going to be actively kind of creating a lot of quick heat as it breaks down. So it's breaking down pretty rapidly. And then you're going to add a layer of brown. And this can be dried leaves, straw, anything basically. It could be shredded newspaper or shredded paper, anything that is going to be more of a carbon. You want those in pretty much equal layers. And if you have a serious Bermuda grass problem like this, you want to make sure that that's about 4 to 5 inches deep. If you don't have as big a problem, 3 inches is fine. So, you kind of maybe alternate the layers. You can do, 1.5 inches or 2 inches of one, 1.5 inches, 2 inches the other, and you're good. And then on top of that, you can put compost or soil or whatever you want. And you can actually put it thick enough that you can plant directly into it immediately. So if you wanted to sort of create some mounds in your yard, that would be a good way to actually, then put 3 or 4 inches of topsoil on top of that, and you could plant directly into that, and it will break down over time and just kind of feed nutrients to your plant over that time. If you don't want to add a lot of height to your landscape, then don't put topsoil on it and wait for it to break down and come back and plant into it in about 3 to 4 months. So you do need to wait, because it's going to be composting in there and kind of breaking down. And that composting and process there kind of burns out the grass that's below it. And it also just creates a physical barrier, so it's not getting any sunlight.
So
and 3 to 4 months before you can plant into it. And it depends a little bit on how thick you made it, and also the time of year. So cooler temperatures, it's slower. Warmer temperatures, it's faster.